All right, so let's dive into Stonehenge, but not the usual stuff you hear about.
Right.
We're going deeper, like way deeper.
Yeah, into something that's going to totally change how you see this place. Like, really change it.
Okay, hit me. I'm all ears. What's the secret?
Well, think about all those pictures, right? Those iconic images of Stonehenge. The stones just standing there for like, what, centuries, millennia even, right?
Yeah.
Well, get this. A lot of that, how those stones look today, it's not actually how they've always been.
Wait, seriously, you mean like they've been moved around or something?
More than moved. We're
Yeah.
talking full-on restorations, like a lot of them. From 1901 all the way to 1964, there were all these projects going on. Straightening stones, setting them in concrete, even re-erecting some of the trilithons, those big structures with the two upright stones and the one across the top.
Whoa, hold on. Are you telling me that some of those famous pictures we see, those aren't how the stones actually stood naturally? That's wild. So, like, if they wanted to preserve this ancient place, wouldn't leaving it alone, even if some stones were leaning or had fallen, wouldn't that be more authentic?
That's a great question. And yeah, even back then, there were people saying exactly that. When they did the first big restoration in 1901, people were furious, like writing letters to newspapers and everything, saying they were messing with history.
Interesting. Kind of a timeless debate, right? Like, even today, we argue about how many we should restore old buildings or monuments.
Totally. It all comes down to what we value more, right? Preservation or authenticity.
So if it wasn't just about keeping the stones from falling over, then what was driving these restorations? Who decided what Stonehenge should look like?
Well, it was mostly archaeologists and engineers, using the best methods they had back then. But things were different then. They didn't have all the fancy dating techniques or non-invasive stuff we have today. Their understanding of Stonehenge was still developing, just like their ideas about how to take care of it.
So you're saying it was all about the context of the time. It's easy for us to judge now, but it makes you wonder, were they just trying to fix it up? Or did they want to create a certain image of Stonehenge, almost like presenting their own version of history?
That's an interesting point. It's like, what story did they want Stonehenge to tell? And how does these restorations shape that story?
Okay, so we've got these restorations happening, but it sounds like there was a lot of debate about it even then. What about the public? How do people react to all this?
Oh, people definitely had opinions, especially after that 1901 restoration. It caused a huge uproar. People felt like it was wrong to interfere with the stones, that it was disrespectful to history.
So even back then, people were already thinking about what makes a historical site authentic.
Absolutely. And that debate is just as relevant today. Think about it. Do we prioritize keeping a site standing, even if it means changing its original structure? Or do we let nature take its course, even if it means risking damage or even losing parts of the monument?
Hmm. Yeah, tough call. And it's even more complicated when you factor in what we talked about earlier, the whole heritage industry thing. Stonehenge isn't just an archaeological site, right? It's a huge tourist attraction, a moneymaker, even a symbol of national pride.
Right. And those things all play into how it's managed, how it's presented to the world, even how it's restored.
Hmm.
And I think that's what makes this whole conversation about Stonehenge so fascinating. It forces us to really think about what we value in history and how we choose to tell its stories.
I'm starting to see that this goes way beyond just moving a few stones around. You mentioned earlier they even re-erected an entire trilithon. That must have been a massive project, especially back then.
Oh, it was. We're talking major engineering feats. They were using huge cranes and all kinds of planning
Hmm.
to lift these massive stones back into place. Like in 1958, they used this giant crane to put back a 45-ton lintel that's the horizontal stone on top, and they had to use steel joints and concrete to secure it. Can you imagine the logistics of that?
I mean, wow, that's crazy. It's like they were practically rebuilding parts of Stonehenge. Honestly, hearing all this about the restorations, it makes me question everything I thought I knew about the place. It's like finding out the Mona Lisa got a touch-up, you know? Makes you wonder what's really authentic anymore.
You've hit the nail on the head. This whole thing really challenges how we see Stonehenge. Like, it's not just this untouched relic from the past anymore. There's this whole other layer to its story.
Okay, but if they were doing all these restorations, why not just be upfront about it? Why downplay it or even leave it out of the guidebooks like you mentioned before?
Well, it's hard to know for sure, but it probably comes down to a few things. Maybe they didn't want to cause controversy. Maybe they wanted to present a simpler, more romantic version of Stonehenge. Or maybe they genuinely thought that the restorations, since they were done with good intentions, didn't really change the authenticity of the site.
Hmm. But like we've been saying, even small changes can have a big impact on how people see and understand a place. And with a place like Stonehenge, with all its symbolism and cultural baggage, those choices matter even more.
Right. Every decision they made, from where to put the walkways to what they wrote in the guidebooks, it all tells a story. And that story shapes how people experience Stonehenge.
It's like setting up an exhibit, right? You choose what to display, how to light it, what information to put on the labels. You're creating a narrative, even if you don't say it out loud.
Exactly. And with Stonehenge, that narrative often focuses on the ancient origins, the solstice connection, the mystery of it all. And those are important parts of its history for sure, but they're not the whole story.
Right, we're getting a much bigger picture now. But we've mostly talked about those big, obvious restorations, moving stones, rebuilding trilithons. Were there other, maybe less noticeable things they did that also changed how we see Stonehenge?
Oh, definitely. Things that people might not even notice at first glance, like cleaning the stones, getting rid of the moss and lichen, filling in cracks. Those might seem like small details, but they can really change how the monument looks and feels overall.
It's kind of like the difference between seeing an old photo that's faded and scratched and
Yeah.
then seeing a digitally restored version. They're both interesting, but they give you a different impression.
Yeah, exactly. And with Stonehenge, even something as simple as cleaning a stone could be seen as a form of restoration. It just goes to show that the line between preserving something and changing it can be pretty blurry.
So what we see at Stonehenge today isn't just those ancient stones. It's also all the work that was done in the 20th century and even our own ideas and expectations that we bring with us.
Absolutely. And it's that mix of old and new, natural and human-made that makes Stonehenge so fascinating. It's not just a relic of the past, it's a living site, constantly changing as we learn more about it and reinterpret its story.
And speaking of reinterpreting, let's talk about that John Constable painting from 1835. You said earlier that if you compare it to modern photos, it looks pretty different. What does that tell us?
That painting is like a time capsule. It shows us how people saw Stonehenge back then, before all the big restorations. It's a reminder that our understanding of the site has changed over time, just like the site itself.
It's like we're seeing Stonehenge through someone else's eyes, someone who lived in a different time. It makes you realize that even something as seemingly permanent as Stonehenge can be shaped and reshaped by how we see it.
Absolutely, and that's one of the key takeaways here. Stonehenge isn't just about the stones. It's about all the layers of history, the interventions, the interpretations that have built up over time.
Speaking of layers, we've been focused on the 20th century, but what about before that? Did anyone try to fix up or reimagine Stonehenge before they had concrete and cranes? It's been around for ages, so someone must have had ideas.
That's a great point. Our focus has been on the 20th century, but Stonehenge has been around for thousands of years, and people have been interacting with it all that time. And yeah, there's definitely evidence of earlier interventions, some intentional, some maybe accidental, things that have left their mark on the monument, for instance. Well, you see, back then, archaeologists, they really focused on keeping the monument stable. They were worried about the stones, maybe collapsing or getting damaged, especially with more and more tourists coming to see the site.
Yeah, that makes sense. But did they really have to use concrete? It just seems so, I don't know, out of place in a prehistoric monument.
I know, right? It does seem a bit strange now. But back then, concrete was this new, modern material, and those engineers, they thought it was the perfect solution. They figured it would be strong, it would last, it would give that leaning stone a good, solid base.
I guess every generation has its own ideas about what's the best way to do things, but what about the people back then? How did they feel about using concrete on Stonehenge?
Oh, a lot of people were not happy about it.
Yeah.
Not at all. They thought it was like vandalism, like ruining something sacred. They said Stonehenge should be allowed to just age naturally, even if it meant some stones eventually fell over. They really hated the concrete, thought it looked terrible.
It's like they saw it as this modern thing messing up something ancient.
Exactly. And you know what? That same debate is still going on today. It makes you think about what we really mean when we say something is authentic, especially when it comes to historical sites.
Right, because it's not always so clear cut. Like, is it more important to keep something standing, even if you have to change it? Or do you let it fall apart?
It's a tough question. And then you add in the heritage industry, like we talked about before, and it gets even more complicated. Because Stonehenge isn't just some forgotten ruin in a field. It's this big tourist destination. It brings in money. It's a symbol for the whole country.
So those things all play into how they decide to take care of it. It makes you think, Maybe those restorers, even if they weren't aware of it, were trying to make Stonehenge more appealing, something that would draw bigger crowds.
It's possible, right? I mean, Stonehenge has always been this mysterious place, and those restorations, they definitely played a role in how people see it and understand it.
Like those guidebooks we talked about, the ones that didn't mention the restorations or made them sound less significant. Do you think they were trying to protect the image of Stonehenge as this perfect ancient monument?
Well, who knows for sure.
Hmm.
But I think there were probably a few reasons for that. Maybe they wanted to avoid controversy, to keep things simple, or maybe they honestly believed that the restorations didn't really change the essence of Stonehenge.
But as we've been talking about, even small changes can affect how people experience a place, right? And with a place like Stonehenge, a place with so much history and meaning, those choices matter even more.
Absolutely. Yeah. Every little thing they did, where they put in up paths, the information they gave people, it all contributed to a certain story about Stonehenge. And that story, it shapes how visitors experience the site.
It's like they were curating the experience, choosing what people would see and how they would see it.
Right. And with Stonehenge, that story usually focuses on the ancient past, the connection to the solstice, all the mysteries surrounding it. And those are all valid and important, but they're not the whole story.
Okay, so we've talked about the big restorations, moving stones and all that, but were there other, maybe less obvious things they did that changed how we see Stonehenge?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Things that people might not even think about, like they cleaned the stones, got rid of all the moss and lichen, filled in cracks and things like that. It might not sound like much, but it really changes the whole look and feel of the monument.
It's like cleaning up an old photo, right? You can still see the original image, but it looks different.
Exactly. And with Stonehenge, even something as simple as cleaning a stone, it's a form of restoration. It shows how blurry that line can be between preserving something and changing it.
So the Stonehenge we see today, it's not just the original monument. It's all those things that were done to it in the 20th century, and even the ideas we bring with us when we visit.
That's it. It's that mix, the old and the new, the natural and the man-made, that makes Stonehenge so interesting. It's not just stuck in the past. It keeps evolving, keeps changing as we learn more about it.
Right, because our understanding of it changes. And speaking of that, what about that John Constable painting from 1835? You said it looks pretty different from modern photos. What's the story there?
That painting is fascinating. It's like a window into the past, before all those big restorations. It shows us how people saw Stonehenge back then. It's a good reminder that our understanding of the site has evolved over time, just like Stonehenge itself.
Wow, so it's like we're seeing Stonehenge through the eyes of someone who lived 200 years ago. It makes you realize that even something as massive and ancient as Stonehenge, it's still been shaped by how people see it.
For sure. And that's a key takeaway from all this. It's not just about the stones themselves. It's about all the layers of history, the things people have done to it, the different ways they've interpreted it over time.
We've talked a lot about the 20th century, but what about before that? Did anyone try to fix up or change Stonehenge before they had modern tools and technology? I mean, it's been around for so long, someone must have had some ideas.
You're right. We've mostly focused on the 20th century. But Stonehenge has a long, long history, and people have been interacting with it for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's definitely evidence of people trying to move stones, adjust things, even repurpose parts of it. Some of it was probably practical, like trying to stop a stone from falling over, but some of it might have been related to beliefs or rituals that we can only guess at now.
So Stonehenge has been this kind of ongoing project for centuries. It makes you wonder what those ancient builders would think if they could see it today.
It's a good question, right? And it brings us back to this idea of authenticity, knowing that Stonehenge has been touched and changed by people throughout its history. What does authentic even mean anymore?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Is it about keeping things exactly as they were at some point in the past? Or is it about recognizing all the different ways people have interacted with the site over time?
Maybe it's both. Maybe it's about understanding that Stonehenge isn't frozen in time. It has this long, complicated history, and it's still changing, still evolving as we learn more about it. Even the way we study and interpret it, that's a form of interaction. It's part of its story.
So maybe authenticity isn't about erasing those traces of human intervention. Maybe it's about seeing them as part of the bigger picture, part of what makes Stonehenge so unique. It's like those Japanese pottery techniques where they mend broken pieces with gold. They see those repairs as adding to the beauty and history of the object.
That's a great analogy. Instead of trying to hide the restorations, we can see them as opportunities to learn. They tell us how people in the past saw Stonehenge, what they valued, how they tried to understand it.
This whole conversation has really changed how I think about Stonehenge. I used to think of it as this mysterious, almost alien place, but now I see it as this testament to human curiosity and our fascination with the past. Maybe that's even more interesting than the idea of it being this untouched monument.
I agree. By looking at the whole picture, all the complexities, all the layers of history, we can really appreciate what makes Stonehenge so special.
So, where do we go from here? Knowing all this, how should we approach Stonehenge when we visit?
I think it's about looking deeper, going beyond the surface. Don't just accept the easy answers. Think about the different perspectives, the different reasons people have had for interacting with Stonehenge. Be open to new ideas, even if they challenge what you thought you knew.
So, it's about being more than just a tourist. It's about being an active participant in the story of Stonehenge, the story that connects the past, the present, and the future.
Well said. And that's what's so great about these deep dives. It's not about giving you all the answers. It's about opening up new questions, new ways of thinking. Stonehenge, even though it's so famous, it still has so much to teach us.
Yeah, like you said, there's always more to learn, more to discover, more to question. Stonehenge is a reminder that the past is never really gone. It's still shaping us, still influencing how we see the world. So the next time you see those stones, remember, you're not just looking at a monument, you're looking at a reflection of humanity's search for meaning and understanding. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the secrets of Stonehenge. We hope you'll join us again next time for another journey into the depths of knowledge.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Stonehenge has been around for, what, thousands of years? It's hard to imagine it's just been sitting there untouched all that time.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, we've been talking about all those 20th century restorations, but what about even earlier? Before concrete and all that, did people try to, I don't know, fix Stonehenge before the modern era?
Well, you're right. We've been focused on the 20th century. But Stonehenge, this place has a really long history, right? People been drawn to it for centuries, trying to figure it out, make sense of it all.
So it's not just ancient druids doing their ceremonies. You're saying people were actually moving the stones around, like messing with the structure?
Messing might be a bit strong.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's actually evidence of people trying to, I don't know, move them, adjust them, even use the stones for different purposes, like going way back.
That's pretty mind-blowing. So it's like Stonehenge has always been kind of a work in progress, each generation putting their own spin on it. Makes you wonder what those prehistoric builders would think of it all now.
Right. I mean, it brings us back to this whole question of authenticity. If people have been changing Stonehenge for centuries, what does authentic even mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, is it about preserving it exactly as it was at some point in the past? Or is it more about, acknowledging all those layers of human interaction, seeing how they've shaped the site over time?
Maybe it's a bit of both, right? Stonehenge isn't like a snapshot frozen in time. It's a place with a long and complicated past, and it's still evolving as we learn more and, yeah, I guess even as we interpret it.
So maybe authenticity isn't about erasing the marks people have left on Stonehenge, but understanding them, seeing those interventions as part of its story. It's like, those Japanese pottery techniques where they repair cracks with gold, like highlighting the repairs instead of hiding them?
Oh, yeah, I love that. Instead of pretending those restorations never happened, we can actually learn from them, right? They can tell us how people in the past saw Stonehenge, what it meant to them, how they tried to understand it.
This whole conversation has really changed my perspective on Stonehenge. I used to think of it as this, I don't know, almost alien place. But now I'm seeing it more as this amazing testament to human curiosity and our fascination with history. It's like more human now, in a way.
I know what you mean, and that's what makes it so compelling, right? It's not just some ancient monument. It's this living, breathing thing. It's still telling its story.
So what does this all mean for us, the people who visit Stonehenge today? How should we approach it knowing all this?
Well, I think the key is to go beyond the surface, Look past those picture-perfect images, those simple explanations. Ask questions. Think about the different perspectives, the motivations behind all those changes that have been made over time. And don't be afraid to challenge your assumptions.
Yeah.
Or even embrace the mystery of it all.
So it's about being more than just a tourist. It's about engaging with the story of Stonehenge, being part of this conversation that spans across centuries.
Exactly. That's what makes these deep dives so rewarding, right? It's not about finding all the answers. It's about asking the right questions. And Stonehenge, even though it's so famous and well studied, it still holds so many mysteries.
Yeah, and that's the best part. There's always more to learn, more to discover. Stonehenge is a constant reminder that the past isn't really over, it's still with us, shaping how we see the world. So next time you stand before those stones, remember, you're not just looking at a monument, you're looking at a reflection of humanity's long search for meaning and understanding. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the secrets of Stonehenge. We hope you'll join us again next time for another journey into the depths